were carved out from the countryside. By the 1960s, there were more than 90 fiefdoms in St. Louis County, and in no area was the balkanization worse than around the Normandie golf course.
Incorporation is, relatively easy, and there's a whole story there about World War II, post-World War II development in North St. Louis County, and essentially it's very wrapped up in race. People fleeing the ghettos of the city of St. Louis, which of course underwent an industrial boom and attracted workers from African-American industrial workers from the South who came here in search of opportunity, and then of course the jobs began to disappear quite rapidly in the 50s and into the 60s, and so people were fleeing deteriorating neighborhoods in the north side of the city of St. Louis. And they viewed the developers, these small suburbs in North County are essentially developer suburbs. They were subdivisions, and then when the developer finished with the subdivision, the residents incorporated. So it's really it's almost like a private developer created the suburbs. It's much like almost like a residential community association or a common interest development in the Sun Belt, right? It's almost like a little gated community or whatever. And I think the feeling was that this was a way to protect them from the kind of tremendous urban decline, and it was not irrational at all. I mean, they saw neighborhoods that went downhill quite rapidly, and they were very fearful. And by controlling land use and by engaging in restrictive zoning, and that it was felt that they could protect themselves. Now, these were not upper income suburbs. These were middle or working class suburbs. And it turns out in some ways, ironically enough, that their small size has made it very difficult for them to defend themselves in the present climate. So I think there was a kind of a sense that they would kind of create walls around them and be able to really protect themselves from urban deterioration. The big problem, I think, is that cities are quite diverse in their land use functions. They have housing of different ages. They have commercial. They have office. They have tremendous assets like St. Louis University and Washington University. They have historic districts. They have historic preservation tax credits. That's another policy that I think is probably important for cities. They have stadia and convention centers and a tourist industry and a downtown. They have Barnes Jewish Hospital. They have Forest Park. And there's all these tremendous assets of the city of St. Louis, whereas the inner ring suburbs often are kind of mono land use, one land use, often residential, without the commercial tax base basically to fall back on. And that's really where it's difficult. And the fact of the matter is, each situation is different, but in general, residential development is not a fiscal winner for suburbs. Residential development by itself, depending upon the number of children in the schools, is usually a fiscal loser. So you have to balance residential development with some sort of commercial development. And here in Missouri, where the sales tax is so important, I think the Growth in the Heartland study by the Brookings Institution cited the figure that we rely about 3 times the percentage in Missouri cities for sales tax that is typical of cities around the country. So sales tax is very important, so having that those commercial tax ratables, those sales tax revenues is very important to fiscal viability. In these little suburbs that are predominantly residential have a problem. Not only that, but often the homes are very small, maybe 1,000 square feet. They all were built at the same time, so all of these systems come due 30, 40 years later, and people have to decide whether to invest or not. It may make more sense to build new if you're a growing family, and you need more space, and so they're not adaptable. Whereas the housing stock in St. Louis, which of course, much of which has been unfortunately destroyed, but a lot of it is larger, historic, with tall ceilings and other amenities, historic amenities that make it attractive to developers. So you've got these inner ring suburbs that I think really are an emerging problem and a kind of a policy vacuum. There's a kind of a policy blind spot there. I mean, as rough as it is for central cities, inner ring suburbs I think are in more difficult shape.
This fragmented governmental structure greatly limits the options available to save the old course.
These local courses in the middle of the St. Louis area are struggling and either have to be rehabbed, or a lot of them are closing down because of that. There's 2 or 3 in town right now, besides Normandie, that are in trouble and are closing down. St. Charles, St. Andrews, which was in St. Charles area, was closed down. Paddock, which was in North area, Florissant area, they were on the midst of closing down, and the city of Florissant bought that course and has rehabbed it in its beautiful shape now, and it's really helpful now.
But Florissant is a rarity in St. Louis County. It actually has a sizable population of about 50,000 people. Belnor, on the other hand, has just 1,600 people and not near enough resources to purchase the Normandie golf course. St. Louis has long had a sizable African American population, and throughout the 19th century, black families could be found living in all of the city's wards. But as Southern blacks moved to the city in search for industrial jobs at the turn of the 20th century, severe restrictions were placed upon where they could live. In 1915, this practice of racial segregation was actually codified into law when St. Louis became the only city in the nation ever to pass an ordinance by referendum that specifically demarcated where blacks could live block by block. This propelled hyper-segregation and established 2 distinct types of streets, those that were all black and those that were lily white. These streets were often separated by nothing more than an alley, as spoofed by this editorial cartoon by Daniel R. Fitzpatrick, expressing the Post-Dispatch's opposition to the proposed ordinance. And even though the United States Supreme Court would make the ordinance null and void in its 1917 Buchanan v. Worley decision, St. Louisans would discover other methods to achieve the same goal. In 1923, the local real estate board took it upon itself to map out which blocks would become exclusively African American, as shown in yellow on this map. Basically, the real estate agents agreed among themselves to not sell any homes outside of this area to black families. Meanwhile, white homeowners were taking no chances with putting their trust in the local real estate board. They discovered the deed restriction, a squib on the deed of their property that would bar its sale to anyone, quote, not of the Caucasian race, unquote. These restrictive covenants, as they were called, proved to be extremely popular in St. Louis, as evidenced on this map showing the blocks barring African Americans in 1945. In 1948, a lawsuit over a restrictive covenant on a house on Labadie Avenue made it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. The court, in its seminal Shelley v. Kramer decision, held that deed restrictions flew in the face of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. But despite the decision in Shelley, restrictive covenants continued to be privately enforced throughout St. Louis. It was not until the Fair Housing Act in 1968 that African Americans would gain equal access to the housing market, or so they thought.
A couple of weeks ago, we had the senior men's open golf tournament here in Bellerive. Now, Bellerive Country Club was in Normandie, where the campus of the University of Missouri is now. And why did they move? Why did Bellerive move in the 1950s? Well, you can think of several reasons, but one of them is the encroachment of undesirables, as they would put it. And Bellerive wasn't even number 1 socially speaking, although it was up there. I lived on Pasadena Hills. There were people who were moving out of there because of black in-migration.
We started getting phone calls in my community, Northwoods, about would you be interested in selling your house? I have a buyer that's very interested. I'd be more than happy to buy the house from you and sell it. And we started getting cards, and then we got a card that said, are you sure you want to live where you live when they are moving in, and the they was in dark letters and capitalized. And then we had people that were insurance men that would come to your house and collect your insurance, and they loved the old people, and they'd say, do you know that every time one of them moves in, you lose another $1,000 on your home? Old folks panic. They'd sell their house, sometimes they'd sell their house, and we're talking many years ago when houses were cheaper. They'd sell their house for maybe $13,000, and the real estate man would turn around and sell it for $30,000. So I got used to that. So I just kept getting more and more and more involved. Started a residential service and did some tests. Had a black couple, 2 newspaper people, and a white couple who were likewise in some supreme job of some sort, and had them go out and look at houses that were for sale and open. We had a beautiful home in Northwoods for sale. I would have liked to have bought it myself. And the real estate person is sitting in there and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just had a couple leave and they've made an offer and it looks like the owner's going to take it, but I have a house." This is a black couple I'm talking about. I mean a white couple. But I do have a house that is almost identical to it in Webster Groves. I'd like to take you out there and show it to you. Then the black couple would come into the house in Webster Groves, and the real estate person would say, "Oh, that couple that just left, they made an offer and it looks like it's going to be a good offer, but I have one very similar to this in Northwoods." So they would bait and trade. My husband even went to a real estate class just to see what they tell their new real estate people. And after they learned about real estate and everything, the man drew a red line around our community of 20, at that time, 25 municipalities. And he said, "Now, where this red line is, you never show a white person, even if they demand to be seen, that it be seen. We only show African American or people of that ethnic quality in those homes." Then I found out they were putting people in homes that really couldn't afford it. Then along came winter and the furnace went out. So the people had the chance, had to make the decision, put the new furnace in or get a new furnace and skip the house payment this month. And okay, so they got themselves into a frenzy. And eventually the house was foreclosed on because they couldn't make the payments. So the real estate man would turn around and resell the same house. I found in my studies and reading the county and in property transfers that there were houses that were sold as many as 3 times. And then I figured out, I got it. The real estate man gets paid a commission every time he sells it. The mortgage is insured by the United States government, so the mortgage lender doesn't lose any money. He gets all of his money. The only poor dealer in this whole thing is a guy and his wife and 2 children that have been put out on the street. They now have a bad name in credit. They put down every last cent they had as a down payment. Now they got no credit and no money to go and find another house. What do?
And in the meantime, the empty, foreclosed house would negatively impact its surrounding neighborhood.
Well, I caught 3 of them. And I thought, you, excuse the expression, son of a guns, I'm going to get you. So I filed suit against them.
3 real estate.
3 real estate companies. And they, oh God, the one called me and said, "You can't do this to me, my daughter's a nun." And I said, "Well, she's not helping you." And anyway, what they put me through at my deposition, it was just absolutely murder. But in the meantime, hearing about what I was going to do, the Justice Department sent me 2 lawyers, a lady and a gentleman. Fantastic people. And they represented me in the case.
With the assistance of the Justice Department, Ms. Waltz was successful in preventing the local real estate juggernaut from blockbusting Belnor and Greendale.
So 2 of them went out of business and one signed a consent decree that he would never do it again. And that's primarily how we got it started.
And due largely to the efforts of Ms. Waltz, the area immediately surrounding the Normandie Golf Course has maintained a healthy balance of diversity for some 30 years now. Most of the other areas in this part of St. Louis have not maintained a racial balance. They continue to reflect the legacy of racial segregation, having transitioned quickly from all white to all black. This continued pattern of white flight elicits the following response from Ms. Walt.
If you won't go in to the gates of heaven because St. Peter is black, there's only one place left for you to go. Right?
The racial balance of Belnor and Greendale has evolved slowly. The sudden influx of 500 housing units on the site of the old course could place this balance in jeopardy.
With regard to the delicacy of the balance with regard to diverse racial and economic backgrounds of the people who live in Belnor and Greendale, just racially speaking, Greendale is about 60% African American and about 40% white. The village of Belnor is flip-flopped the other way. Wonderfully diverse community. Older people, younger people, people with children, single people who have just purchased a house, maybe their first house, you know. So we've got an age diversity, we have a racial diversity, we have an economic diversity, and it has evolved over, say, the last 30 to 40 years to be that way, because obviously 30, 40 years ago, it was pretty much a white community out here. And the beauty of that is in jeopardy, I guess, if you do just drop this development in the middle of it. How do you reach out to that new